Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel this elegant puzzle together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Let's get started. The sea air agreed with Poirot, though he would never confess as much. Seated by the window at the majestic hotel, his elegant form was arranged just so, shoes polished to a military gleam, his moustache groomed with mathematical precision. Beside him, I, Captain Arthur Hastings, was halfway through a buttered scone and thoroughly enjoying myself. Outside, the sea sparkled like shattered glass, and the hum of contented holiday-makers drifted through the open window. Poirot, however, seemed far less impressed with the charms of the English coast. "Mon ami," he began, delicately rearranging the teaspoons so they sat equidistant from the sugar bowl. "You English believe you have mastered the art of tea. Alas, you have mastered only the teapot." I laughed. "You'll never be satisfied until every crumb and every cup is aligned like a military parade, will you?" "I do not crave perfection, Hastings," Poirot replied, with his usual air of wounded dignity. "I merely correct imperfections." He had just settled into a small lecture on the superiority of Belgian tea service when a conversation at the next table caught my attention. "Cursed, I tell you," a stout woman in a green hat was saying. "Every man who stayed in that room ended up dead within a month. Mark my words. It's the ghost of the Egyptian priest." Poirot's spoon froze mid-air. "Ghosts, Hastings. You hear? Our neighbours are not only fond of tea, but also of phantoms." I snorted. "You don't believe in that sort of thing, do you?" "Ah," Poirot smiled, eyes twinkling mischievously. "To disbelieve entirely is as foolish as to believe entirely. Let us say, Poirot keeps an open mind." Our conversation on the supernatural was interrupted by the appearance of a liveried concierge, who approached our table with an air of theatrical solemnity. In his gloved hand rested a small cream-coloured envelope, its edges trembling slightly in the breeze from the window. "For Monsieur Poirot," the man announced, bowing low. "Marked urgent, sir." Poirot accepted the letter, his eyes narrowing slightly as he examined the handwriting. "You see, Hastings," he murmured, "the ghosts, they have very fine stationery." Breaking the seal with a delicate flick of his thumbnail, Poirot unfolded the letter. At once, his expression shifted, from amusement to the sharp gleaming alertness I knew so well. "My dear Monsieur Poirot," he read aloud, "I beg you to assist me. There is little time. The curse, it is real. 6 are already dead. I am the last." I leaned closer. "Who's it from?" "Miss Lydia Arkwright," Poirot said, folding the letter neatly and placing it beside his cup. "A guest at this very hotel. A curse, you say?" "Just so." Poirot tapped the envelope thoughtfully. "And yet, the handwriting is remarkably steady for one living under the shadow of death. Probably a hysterical woman," I said. "Some silly superstition about a haunted room." Poirot wagged a finger. "Non, mon ami. Such things, curses and hauntings, are merely stories told to hide the truth, and Poirot is always interested in the truth." Even so, I could not suppress a shiver. The English sun might have been bright, the sea welcoming, but at that moment, something cold seemed to brush against the back of my neck. We found Miss Lydia Arkwright in the hotel's reading room, seated upright in a wing-back chair. Her hands clutched a small leather notebook, and her eyes darted to the door each time it creaked open. She was a woman in her early 50s, neatly dressed, but with the unmistakable air of someone who had been sleeping badly for some time. She looked up as we approached, relief mingling with fear in her expression. "Monsieur Poirot, thank heavens you've come." Poirot introduced us both, then took a seat opposite her, folding his hands neatly over his stomach. "Mademoiselle, you have the air of one who believes herself in mortal peril. You will explain, s'il vous plaît." Miss Arkwright's hands trembled as she opened the notebook. "It started 20 years ago," I was part of a touring theatre company. We performed across Europe and North Africa. She hesitated. And in Egypt. Egypt, eh? I said. Let me guess. A curse? She nodded. We were in a village near the Valley of the Kings. One night, a few of us went exploring. There was a tomb, small, half buried in sand. We thought it would be fun. She swallowed hard. But we saw something we shouldn't have seen. A ceremony. We were discovered, chased out into the desert. Poirot steepled his fingers. And now? Since then, one by one, the others have died. Accidents, suicides, sudden illness, but always strange circumstances. There were 7 of us who saw the ritual. Now, 6 are dead. Leaving you, Poirot said softly. She nodded. This morning, under my door, I found this. She passed him a slip of paper, written in jagged block letters. The 7th witness must die. I felt my stomach drop. Good Lord. Poirot's gaze was thoughtful, almost mathematical. And these 6 deaths, each took place after receiving such a note? Yes. Curious, Poirot murmured. The handwriting varies, yet the hand behind them, I suspect, does not. Miss Arkwright wrung her hands. Monsieur Poirot, if you won't help me, I shall surely die. Poirot rose, his expression calm. Mademoiselle, Poirot never permits death to arrive uninvited. We shall see to it that the 7th witness lives. It would be unfair to say Poirot believed in curses, but it would be equally untrue to claim he dismissed them entirely. For while my friend placed no faith in supernatural powers, he had the utmost respect for the power of belief itself. It is the psychology that fascinates mon ami, he said, tapping the letter gently against the table. A woman who believes herself cursed will behave very differently from one who fears only a mortal threat. I shook my head. I still say it's a string of unfortunate coincidences. Poirot's moustache bristled. Coincidence? Non, the lazy refuge of those who lack imagination. Consider, Hastings, a sequence of 7. It is almost too neat. I frowned. What do you mean? 7 witnesses, 6 dead. 1 remains. It is mathematical, mon cher. And yet human life, it rarely fits so tidily into such patterns unless there is a hand arranging the pieces. That's stretching it, Poirot. He wagged a finger. To you, perhaps, but to the mind that wishes to impose order where there is chaos, to the mind that believes itself wronged, such symmetry offers both comfort and revenge. This is no curse, Hastings. This is a design. His gaze drifted toward the window, where the afternoon sun glittered across the sea. Besides, this letter, it is too carefully worded, too restrained for real hysteria. Our Miss Arkwright is afraid, yes, but she is also hiding something. I sighed, knowing there was no point in arguing once Poirot's little grey cells had taken hold of a thread. Well, I said, pushing back my chair, shall we go and meet our mysterious lady? Ah, Poirot smiled, rising with deliberate elegance. The curtain rises, mon ami, and Poirot, he takes the stage. We had barely reached the foot of the grand staircase when it happened. A scream, sharp and sudden, splitting the genteel hush of the hotel like a knife through silk. Good heavens, I exclaimed, nearly spilling my tea. Without a word, Poirot was already moving, quick, purposeful, despite the fuss he usually made over preserving the shine on his shoes. I followed, my heart hammering unpleasantly in my chest. The scream had come from the 2nd floor, a narrow corridor lined with numbered doors and slightly faded carpet. A chambermaid stood clutching the hem of her apron, her face pale beneath her cap. Poirot reached her first. Mademoiselle, you are distressed. A face, she gasped. Outside the window, white, terrible, staring straight in. The door beside her bore the number 417, the very room Miss Arkwright occupied. Poirot smoothed his waistcoat, his expression calm, but there was an unmistakable glint of satisfaction in his eyes. Hastings, he said softly, the ghosts, they are punctual. Ghosts, my foot, I muttered. But even as I said it, a chill ran down my spine. We reached room 417 in record time, though Poirot's pace was, as always, more methodical glide than frantic dash. I, on the other hand, hurried along at such a speed that I nearly collided with the chambermaid, still lingering near the door, her hands trembling against her apron. "Calm yourself, mademoiselle," Poirot said smoothly, offering her a reassuring smile. "Tell me what you saw." "It was a face, monsieur, pale, terrible, pressed against the window pane." I glanced at the window. We're 2 floors up. Whoever it was must have been standing on the ledge. Poirot said nothing, merely raised an eyebrow before gesturing for me to knock on the door. Miss Arkwright's voice, thin and shaken, bid us enter. The sight that met us was pitiful. The poor woman, wrapped in a paisley dressing gown, perched on the edge of an armchair like a startled bird. Her skin was ashen, her hands still clutching the same leather notebook she'd shown us earlier. "Miss Arkwright," Poirot began, his voice soft but commanding, "describe exactly what occurred." She swallowed hard. "I had just finished writing in my diary when I heard a tap at the window. I thought it must be a branch from the tree outside. But when I looked, there was a face. A face, mademoiselle." She nodded vigorously. Pale as death, eyes like dark holes. I screamed, and it was gone. Poirot's expression remained placid, but his fingers gently adjusted the crease in his cuff. A sign, I knew, that the little grey cells were already turning. "And this face," Poirot continued. "Did you recognize it?" She hesitated. "It looked like one of the others, one of the ones who died." "Which one?" I asked. "Simon Greaves," she whispered. Hastings felt a shiver race down his spine. "But if Greaves is dead—" "Then, mon ami," Poirot said mildly, "either ghosts walk the corridors of the Majestic, or someone very much alive wishes us to believe they do." He glanced at the window, where a faint smudge could be seen on the glass, too high for a natural touch, too low for a trick of the light. Poirot's moustache quivered. Curious. Once Miss Arkwright had been provided with a restorative brandy, and I had accepted one on her behalf, for my own nerves. She began her tale. It was, as Poirot liked to say, a story of human folly in 3 acts: curiosity, arrogance, and consequence. "It was 20 years ago," she said. "We were a touring company, a ragtag band of actors, singers, and stagehands, hired to bring a touch of English theatre to the world." "Your company name?" Poirot asked. "The Featherstone Players," she replied. "Lady Margot Featherstone was our lead actress, and the one who arranged the tour." "Ah," Poirot nodded. "And Egypt." "That was a last-minute addition," she explained. "An eccentric patron had offered to finance an extra month of performances if we agreed to perform in his private theatre in a village near the Valley of the Kings." Here she paused, taking a deep breath. "It started as a lark. One of the locals warned us about a tomb outside the village, a place no one was allowed to enter after sunset. Naturally, that made it irresistible. I groaned. You English and your passion for forbidden things." She gave me a weak smile. "We took lanterns and crept out after dark. Lady Margot, Simon Greaves, Roland Mears, Dr. Vance, Colonel Breen, Mrs. Frobisher, and me." Poirot's fingers tapped a gentle rhythm on the arm of his chair, committing the names to memory. "We expected cobwebs and sarcophagi," Miss Arkwright continued. "What we found was a ceremony." Poirot's head tilted. "Describe this ceremony." "A group of men, priests I suppose, chanting around an open sarcophagus. They were placing something inside it, something wrapped in cloth. We must have made a noise because they saw us." Her hands gripped the arms of her chair. "They chased us out, screaming at us in Arabic. We thought it was all terribly exciting at the time. But the next morning, a boy who worked at the theatre told us the ceremony was sacred and that those who saw it would die before their time. Superstition, I said firmly. Is it? She asked, her voice trembling. Because in the years since, every one of us who witnessed that ceremony has died, except me. Poirot's gaze sharpened. The cause of these deaths? Accidents, illnesses, suicides, each one more bizarre than the last. And they all received notes, like the one you showed me? Yes. Poirot leaned back, steepling his fingers. And you, mademoiselle, you took no precautions? What could I do? I left the theatre, changed my name, moved from place to place, but the letters always found me. Poirot stood. This curse, it is very persistent, yes? Almost as though it had a human hand to guide it. She paled. You think it's one of us? I think, Poirot said, that curses are very obliging when they are assisted. By the time we returned to the lounge at the Majestic, Poirot had summoned the full roster of suspects, a gathering that felt half like a theatrical reunion and half like a courtroom dock. I must confess, seeing them all assembled gave me the peculiar sensation of stepping into a play that had begun long before we arrived. Dr. Septimus Vance stood stiff-backed near the fireplace, hands clasped behind him in the severe posture of a man accustomed to delivering university lectures. Nonsense, all of it, he muttered when I tried to introduce myself. Curses are for the credulous. Beside him, Colonel Arthur Breen occupied a wing-back chair as though it were a military throne, his moustache bristling with indignation. Dashed embarrassing, being dragged into all this rot again, he said, drumming his fingers on the armrest. Told them years ago, there's no curse, just weak constitutions. Across the room, perched delicately but attentively, sat Mrs. Estelle Frobisher, a widow of substantial means and equally substantial opinions. We made a mistake going into that tomb, she said in a voice touched with guilt and grandeur. But none of this should be revived now. It's the past. Slumped against the window was Simon Greaves, who once served as the troupe's stage manager. His face bore the marks of ruin. Too much drink, too many regrets. If there's a curse, he muttered, it's the curse of remembering too much. The most dramatic entrance belonged to Lady Margot Featherstone herself, a woman who had once been renowned for her beauty and stage presence. Her silk scarf trailed like mist behind her, and her eyes darted theatrically toward the corners of the room. There are forces beyond us, she announced, voice trembling in a way I suspected was rehearsed. Forces we disturbed. And then there was Roland Mears, the shadowy financier who had funded the troupe's Egyptian detour. Mears was tall, lean, and moved like someone who preferred to remain unseen. His expression was bland, but his eyes missed nothing. Poirot took them all in, like a chess player inspecting the board before the first move. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, hands clasped before him. You find yourselves gathered once more, not on a stage, but in a drama of life and death. I have witnessed Poirot conduct many investigations, but there was something particularly theatrical about this one. Perhaps it was the cast itself. Actors and actresses, accustomed to playing parts, even when faced with their own mortality. Let us begin, Poirot said, folding himself into the centre chair. You were all present in Egypt, yes? You saw the ceremony. Lady Margot clutched her scarf dramatically. I saw something more. I saw a spirit, a warning. Nonsense, barked Colonel Breen. We saw men performing a burial rite, nothing more. Yet, said Poirot, when you returned to England, the letters began. Each witness received one before their unfortunate demise. And you say you received yours today? Mrs. Frobisher asked Miss Arkwright. Miss Arkwright nodded, fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. This morning, slipped under my door. Curious, said Poirot. And where were each of you last night? That was when the alibis began, a parade of two neat answers, each presented with a little too much confidence. Dr. Vance had dined alone in his room, reading scientific journals. Colonel Breen had taken his constitutional walk along the promenade, returning at precisely 9:30. Mrs. Frobisher had written letters to her solicitor. Simon Greaves had been at the hotel bar until closing, though no one could quite recall seeing him there. Lady Margot had held a séance in her suite, a séance attended by no one but herself. Roland Mears had been in London all week, though curiously, the porter recalled seeing him step off the train that morning. "Such excellent memories," Poirot said cheerfully. "It is rare, Hastings, that so many alibis are both convenient and completely unreliable." Simon Greaves, pale and sweating, poured himself another drink. "We shouldn't have gone into that tomb," he muttered. "None of this would have happened if we'd just left well enough alone." "But you did not," said Poirot. "Why?" Roland Mears finally spoke, his voice dry and flat. "Because curiosity is expensive, and I'd invested too much to let it pass without a little excitement." Poirot's head tilted. "And was there perhaps something else in that tomb? Something valuable?" Silence. "Ah," Poirot said softly. "Already the air smells of hidden motives. Mon ami, take note. When men stumble upon ancient rituals, they are afraid. But when they stumble upon opportunity, they are tempted." Lady Margot's voice, soft and insinuating, cut through the quiet. "We all have something to hide, Monsieur Poirot." "Yes," Poirot agreed, his eyes gleaming. "The question is, who among you hides a crime?" It is a curious fact that when Poirot investigates, the very air of a place seems to shift. People grow either suspiciously silent or suspiciously helpful, rarely anything in between. Such was the case at the Majestic. With the troop of suspects dismissed to their rooms, Poirot and I took a leisurely stroll through the public areas, pausing here and there as Poirot's eyes caught some imperfection that seemed invisible to the rest of us. "Observe, Hastings," he said, gesturing toward the lobby notice board. "This morning's events have already birthed a forest of rumours." Pinned between advertisements for ballroom dances and excursions to local ruins, someone had scrawled in bold handwriting, "Room 417 is cursed. Leave before nightfall." "Nonsense," I muttered. "Non, mon ami. It is deliberate." "You think one of them wrote it?" Poirot tapped his temple. "The human mind. It cannot resist a touch of the dramatic. Someone wishes to create une ambiance of fear." We drifted toward the staff corridor, where the chambermaid who had first screamed was huddled with two other maids, whispering furiously. The moment they saw Poirot, they fell silent. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said kindly, "I would ask you once more, what exactly did you see outside the window?" The girl hesitated. It was a face, monsieur, pale, hollow-eyed." "But whose face?" "I couldn't say." Poirot leaned forward. "Or would not." She trembled. "There's talk amongst the staff, sir. They say the ghost walks, the ghost of Simon Greaves." "Simon Greaves, who died last year," I said. "That's impossible." Poirot merely smiled. "And yet, Hastings, it is precisely the kind of impossibility that requires explanation." We continued to the hotel's small library, where a selection of Egyptian travel books occupied an entire shelf. Poirot ran his finger along the spines. "Ah," he said softly, removing one thin volume. Its cover read, "The Curse of the Unseen Witnesses." The pages were yellowed with age, but a single page was missing, torn clean from the binding. "Curious," Poirot murmured. "Coincidence?" I suggested. "Never, mon ami." The night air felt heavier when we stepped outside, the glow from the ornamental pond, reflecting like molten gold. Poirot paused, looking at the water with an expression I could not place. "What is it?" I asked. "Merely this, Hastings. When the curtain falls, it is not always the end of the play." We had not been standing by the pond for more than 2 minutes when a dreadful sound split the silence. A choked, half-submerged gasp, followed by a splash. Poirot moved faster than I'd seen him move in years, his patent leather shoes sinking into the damp grass as we both rushed toward the water's edge. Floating face down, his arms spread wide, was the unmistakable figure of Simon Greaves. or so I thought at first glance. Poirot knelt, remarkably unconcerned about his trousers, and turned the body over. It was not Simon Greaves, but one of the hotel's porters, a man I barely recognized. In his stiff fingers was clutched a small bronze scarab. "A message," Poirot said quietly. The crowd that gathered was instantaneous. Guests peered from balconies, waiters abandoned trays, and the surviving troupe members stumbled into the garden, each face frozen in varying degrees of horror and shock. "It's starting again," Mrs. Frobisher whispered. Poirot stood, brushing grass from his knees. "Non, madame. It has never stopped." The scarab was ancient, weathered, yet oddly clean, as though it had been placed there deliberately. Poirot examined it for a moment, then handed it to me. "Notice anything, Hastings?" "It's a scarab," I said blankly. "Oui, but see, the surface is too smooth, too perfect. This scarab has been handled recently. Often." I stared at the small object, puzzled. "But what does it mean?" "It means," Poirot said, "that someone wants us to believe in the curse, and they are very industrious in their efforts." "But why kill the porter?" Poirot sighed. "Why indeed? Unless, of course, the porter saw something, or someone, he was not meant to see." Lady Margot gave a small shriek and leaned heavily on Roland Mears, who seemed more annoyed than concerned. "This was supposed to end 20 years ago," she said faintly. "Ah, Lady Margot," said Poirot gently. "If only life respected such convenient endings." He turned to me. "Come, Hastings. The theatre is open, the players are assembled, and Poirot, he must prepare his grand performance." Poirot has a particular style when it comes to interrogations, though he would be most offended if you use so harsh a word. To him, these were not interrogations. They were conversations, intimate exchanges, a subtle dance in which the other party rarely realized they were being led. The first to sit before him in the lounge was Dr. Septimus Vance, still bristling with scientific detachment. "I suppose you'll want me to swear on my medical degree that ghosts do not exist," Vance said dryly. "Non," Poirot smiled. "I ask only for the truth, not as a scientist, but as a man." Vance sniffed. "The truth is simple. We saw something peculiar in Egypt, and certain weak-minded individuals have since allowed imagination to overtake reason." "But you, Doctor," said Poirot smoothly, "you are not weak-minded, and yet you were one of those who received a letter, were you not?" Vance's composure faltered ever so slightly. "A prank, I assumed." Poirot's smile was as gentle as it was merciless. "Pranks do not end in 6 bodies." Next came Colonel Breen, who carried himself into the room like a man leading a cavalry charge. "Ghastly business," he said. "Superstitious rot." Poirot nodded sympathetically. "And yet, Colonel, you were the first to suggest we had disturbed something unholy." Breen's face darkened. "That was meant to frighten Lady Margot into staying out of trouble, not summon some damned phantom." "And when did you last see Simon Greaves alive?" Breen hesitated just a fraction too long. "Years ago." "Curious," Poirot said softly, "because the barman recalls you and Greaves drinking together only last month." Breen paled. Mrs. Frobisher was more composed, though her fingers trembled as she poured herself a cup of tea. "I knew this would resurface," she said. "You cannot bury the past." "Unless you buried it with purpose, madame," Poirot said gently. She flinched. Lady Margot was pure theatre, a trembling handkerchief and dramatic sighs. "The spirits are restless," she declared. "I have felt them for weeks." Poirot merely smiled. "And perhaps, Lady Margot, you have encouraged them." Finally, there was Roland Mears, smooth and shadowy. "Some things are better left alone, Monsieur Poirot," he said softly. "Ah," Poirot's eyes gleamed. "But you see, Mears, Poirot does not know how to leave things alone." With the preliminary interviews complete, Poirot called the group together to reconstruct the fateful night in Egypt. It was a curious scene, old actors playing old parts, as if the very act of telling the story returned them to who they had once been. "We need to settle one matter," Poirot began. "What exactly did you see in the tomb?" "A ceremony," said Vance firmly. "A curse," murmured Mrs. Frobisher. "A burial," insisted Breen. "None of you agree," Poirot observed. "And yet you were all present." "It was dark," said Lady Margot, with a dramatic flourish. "And terrifying." Mears lit a cigarette with a slow hand. "It wasn't a burial. It was a transaction." The room fell silent. "Explain, if you please," Poirot said softly. Mears exhaled a plume of smoke. "The men we saw, those priests, weren't priests at all. They were smugglers, using the tomb to hide something. We interrupted a sale, not a ceremony." "Why has this never been mentioned before?" Hastings asked. "Because," Mears said, "some of us saw what was being passed from hand to hand. Others were too drunk or too frightened to notice." "And what was it?" Poirot's voice was silk. Mears shrugged. "Gold, jewels, antiquities. So there was profit in this curse after all." Poirot murmured. "Ridiculous," snapped Breen. "We saw a religious ritual." "No," said Mrs. Frobisher softly. "Mears is right. I saw it too. A scarab passed from one hand to another." Hastings started. "A scarab? Like the one in the pond?" Poirot smiled, but his eyes were sharp. "You see, mon ami, the truth, it begins to whisper." There are few things Poirot relishes more than peeling back the respectable veneer of a close-knit group to reveal the messiness underneath. In the case of the Featherstone players, the mess was particularly entertaining. "We begin," Poirot said, "with l'amour." "Love?" I said, surprised. "What does love have to do with it?" Poirot sighed. "Ah, mon cher Hastings, you see but do not observe. Where there is love, there is often jealousy, and where there is jealousy, there is secrecy." He began with Lady Margot. "Your leading lady," Poirot said, "was not, at the time of your Egyptian tour, unattached." Lady Margot pressed a trembling hand to her breast. "How dare you?" "Dare I?" Wee Poirot's expression was cherubic. "For you see, Lady Margot, you were very much attached to one Simon Greaves." A ripple of shock passed through the group. "It was a passionate affair," Poirot continued, "and yet it ended abruptly." "Because of the curse?" I asked. "No, Hastings," Poirot said patiently, "because Simon Greaves had a second secret, a marriage to Mrs. Estelle Frobisher." There was a collective intake of breath. Mrs. Frobisher's teacup clattered into its saucer. "And Mrs. Frobisher," Poirot went on, "was aware of her husband's wandering eye and ensured her will reflected it." He withdrew a copy of a recently amended will, one in which Mrs. Frobisher had cut her husband out entirely, leaving her considerable fortune to her niece. "Convenient," said Poirot, "that Mrs. Frobisher met her unfortunate end shortly after signing this document." "She slipped on the stairs," protested Lady Margot. "Did she?" Poirot's brow lifted. "Or was her death arranged so that a new will, one more favourable to certain parties, could be prepared?" "And Greaves himself?" I asked. "Died a year later in a boating accident," Poirot said smoothly. "But the accident occurred immediately after he, how do you say, confessed too much at a drunken party." "Confessed to what?" "To witnessing something in Egypt that no one was meant to see," Poirot said, "and perhaps to the real reason the troupe entered that tomb, to retrieve something valuable that had already been stolen." The suspects exchanged glances, fear, anger, guilt, all playing across their faces like an ensemble cast struggling to remember their lines. "Secrets, mon ami," Poirot said softly, "are like ghosts. They never rest in peace." That evening, Poirot stood beside the ornamental pond, contemplating the scarab found in the dead man's hand. I, for my part, was contemplating my aching feet. "It's a scarab, Poirot," I said, for what felt like the 5th time. "Oui, Hastings, it is a scarab. but not any scarab. Poirot's fingertip traced its surface. See here, the patina is uneven. It has been handled, yes, but only on one side. The other side is quite clean. And that means? It means, Poirot said patiently, that someone has placed this scarab deliberately, not as part of the victim's possessions, but as a message. To frighten Miss Arkwright? To frighten everyone, Poirot said. We returned to room 417 to examine the window where the veiled figure had been seen. Poirot spent a full 5 minutes studying the glass, his nose nearly touching it. Well? I asked. Poirot stepped back with a satisfied nod. Observe, mon ami. The smudge here, the faint impression there. Someone stood outside the window, but not on the ledge. Impossible, I said. We're 2 floors up. Precisely. Poirot's smile was mischievous. Unless the figure stood not on the ledge, but on a scaffold. Hastings, do you recall the painters working on the exterior? Of course, I said. They've been repainting the facade all week. And you did not think it curious that the scaffold was positioned directly beneath Miss Arkwright's window? Good heavens! Calm yourself, Poirot said. It is, after all, only a stage trick. The veiled figure was no ghost. It was someone in disguise. We returned to the library, where the missing diary page had been torn. Poirot retrieved the diary itself from the hotel manager, flipping through its yellowed pages until he found the ragged edge where the page had been removed. Why tear only this page? I asked. Because, Poirot said, that page contained a description of the original curse, a description someone needed to alter. Alter? We, the veiled figure, the scarab, the message, all were carefully constructed to match the curse exactly. Except the real curse. It never mentioned a veiled figure at all. That part was invented. Why would anyone go to all that trouble? Poirot's smile faded into something sharper. Because, mon ami, someone wishes to convince us all that the curse is real, when in fact the real curse is entirely man-made. We had returned to Poirot's suite, where my friend stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, gazing pensively out to sea. The sky had dimmed to a dusky lavender, and the wind rattled faintly at the panes. I felt the weight of the day pressing down on me. The letters, the scarab, the veiled figure. It was all too much. I'm beginning to wonder, I said, lowering myself into an armchair, if there's something to this curse after all. Poirot turned slowly, his expression one of profound disapproval. Hastings, mon ami, you distress me. Well, what would you have me believe? I protested. 7 people saw that ceremony, 6 are dead, and now a ghostly figure is wandering the halls. What explanation do you propose? Poirot smoothed his moustache with the air of a man burdened with great wisdom and even greater patience. You English, you have a passion for the supernatural. It is always the ghost, the phantom, or the ancient curse. It is never the simpler explanation, the explanation that is rooted in the very human heart. That's all very well, I said, but what if this time it really is something beyond our understanding? Ah, Poirot exclaimed, raising a finger. That is where you err, mon cher, for you see, Poirot already understands. I sat bolt upright. You do? He nodded serenely. The truth, it is not hiding in the shadows, Hastings. It is standing boldly in the light, but wearing a very convincing mask. Then why not expose it? Poirot wagged a finger. Non, 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 not yet. The play, it is only at the 2nd act. The great revelation, it must wait for the perfect dramatic moment. That's infuriating, I said. C'est la vie, Hastings. He crossed the room, inspecting his reflection in the glass, adjusting his tie with surgical precision. Besides, you would not appreciate the solution if I simply handed it to you. No, you must struggle, you must doubt. In this way, when Poirot reveals all, it will shine like the jewel in the crown. I sighed. You enjoy torturing me. Non, Poirot smiled. I enjoy teaching you. The following morning, Poirot requested a private audience with Lady Margot. She arrived wearing a silk turban, heavy with rhinestones, and a velvet cloak embroidered with arcane symbols. I might have been impressed, if not for the faint whiff of theatrical grease paint lingering about her. "My dear Lady Margot," Poirot said, gesturing for her to sit, "I have followed your career with interest." "Have you?" she preened. "Mais oui. From ingénue to leading lady to spiritualist." She folded her hands dramatically. "Some of us are blessed with sensitivity." "Or," said Poirot, "a keen understanding of profit." She stiffened. "I beg your pardon?" Poirot's smile was bland. "You see, Lady Margot, you have built quite the profitable business since your retirement from the stage. Private séances, psychic consultations, lectures on the ancient mysteries. It is very lucrative, no?" "I provide comfort," she protested. "Comfort," Poirot nodded, "and very high fees, particularly when the séance involves a famous curse." Her face paled. "Shall I tell you what I think?" Poirot continued. "I think you have been feeding the legend of the curse for years. A little story here, a convenient letter there, all to keep your clients fascinated and your bookings full." "That's absurd," she cried. "Is it?" Poirot's gaze was sharp. "And yet the diary page, the one torn from the book, was found in your suite." I stared. "Lady Margot?" Poirot held up a hand. "But mon ami, Lady Margot did not kill anyone. She is guilty of theatre, not murder." Lady Margot slumped back into her chair. "I only wanted to make it sound more exciting." "Indeed," said Poirot, "but someone else saw your embellishments and thought, what a perfect mask for murder." Lady Margot's mouth opened and closed, her face now a tragic mask of guilt. "I never meant—" "You meant to frighten," Poirot said gently, "but someone meant to kill." As we left the room, Hastings turned to Poirot. "So, she's innocent?" "Innocent," Poirot said, "but very, very useful." The dining hall at the Majestic had been transformed. The hotel's electric lights were dimmed, and in their place, a dozen candles flickered along the table's length, casting shadows that shivered across the dark wood panelling. It was, as Poirot insisted, a setting befitting the final act of this particular drama. "Why the candles?" I asked as we took our places. "Trying to summon the spirits?" "Non, mon ami," Poirot replied, adjusting his cufflinks. "But the human mind, it is impressionable. In the flicker of a candle, the imagination sees everything and nothing." The suspects entered one by one, each visibly uneasy at the invitation. They were players in a play they had not rehearsed, and Poirot the self-appointed director. Colonel Breen stomped in, his face thunderous. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I won't sit here like a schoolboy." "Sit, mon colonel," Poirot said, voice smooth as cream. "The curtain has already risen." Lady Margot swept in next, her usual theatrical confidence somewhat diminished under the candlelight. Mrs. Frobisher, pale and severe, followed, clasping her handbag like a life-preserver. Dr. Vance maintained his usual air of scientific disdain, while Simon Greaves, nursing a glass of whiskey, looked both weary and resigned. Finally, Roland Mears took a seat at the far end, his expression carefully blank. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, standing at the head of the table, "you are no longer the Featherstone players. You are now something much more rare, a group bound not by art, but by a shared secret." The room was utterly silent. "The time has come," Poirot continued, "to lift the curtain on the truth. Not the supernatural truth you have whispered about for years, but the real truth, the one made of greed, guilt, and fear." Hastings leaned toward me. "He's laying it on a bit thick, isn't he?" Poirot heard, of course. He always did. "Mon ami, a little drama. It helps the digestion." Poirot began his dissection of the alibis with the precision of a surgeon. His voice was calm, his manner almost gentle, but the effect was devastating. "Colonel Breen," Poirot began, You claimed to have taken your constitutional along the promenade at the time the scarab was placed in the dead man's hand. Yet the hotel porter, who knows you well, swears you never left the lounge. Breen's moustache bristled. Confound it! I stepped outside for a moment. I wasn't timing it. Convenient, Poirot said mildly. And you, Doctor? Vance declared you spent the evening reading. Yet the barman distinctly recalls you in the bar, engaged in what he termed a heated conversation with Simon Greaves. Vance flushed. Professional disagreement. Professional? Poirot's brow lifted. Or personal, given your investment in the antiquities found in Egypt. A murmur ran around the table. Mrs. Frobisher, Poirot turned next. You retired early, you said, to write letters, but the chambermaid cleaning your room the next morning found no letters, no blotting paper, and no pen. Curious, no? Mrs. Frobisher's mouth worked silently. And then there is Lady Margot, Poirot continued. You held a séance, you claimed, but the hotel staff saw no one enter your room, and you yourself were seen descending the servants' staircase, heavily veiled. I often take the air, Lady Margot said faintly. Ah, yes. Poirot's smile was razor-sharp. But air alone does not require a mask of linen and shadow. Finally, his gaze rested on Roland Mears. And you, monsieur, your alibi is the most impressive of all. You claim to have spent the evening in London, yet the ticket collector remembers you arriving at the Majestic the night before the death in the pond. Mears shrugged. I changed my mind. Surely that's not a crime. No, Poirot agreed, but altering a will, arranging a staged haunting, and murdering to silence inconvenient witnesses, those are, as you say, more serious matters. The silence was absolute. You see, Poirot concluded, each of you has played a role in this affair, but only one of you has played the part of the killer, and that, mes amis, is the role I shall now unveil. I gripped the table, my heart hammering. I had no idea what was coming. Poirot's eyes gleamed. But first, a small diversion. Hastings, pass me the scarab. With the room still thick with silence, Poirot produced a small leather folder from beneath his chair. He opened it with a theatrical flourish, spreading several sheets of paper across the candle-lit table like a magician preparing a trick. Behold, he said, the letters of death. The assembled group shifted uneasily as they recognized the ominous notes each of them, or their unfortunate colleagues, had received over the years. They were identical in wording, yet each was written in a different hand. A clever trick, yes? Poirot said, his eyes bright with satisfaction. One would assume, since each note came in a different script, that they must have been written by different hands. But non, my friends, that is not the case. Hastings squinted at the papers. But the handwriting… Ah! Poirot raised a finger. Here, mon ami, is where the ingenuity lies. Observe closely. He placed a magnifying glass over the signature of each letter. Under the distortion of the lens, the handwriting revealed faint irregularities. Lines slightly misaligned, spacing just a touch too perfect. These are not letters written in natural hand, Poirot announced. They are carefully traced from existing samples of each victim's own handwriting. Good heavens, I exclaimed. You mean… Oui? Poirot nodded. Each victim was made to believe the threat came from one of their own number, a trick designed to sow suspicion, distrust, and fear. But why would someone go to all that trouble? Mrs. Frobisher asked, her voice tight with dread. Because, Poirot said, the true culprit wished to remain invisible. And what better way to remain unseen than to make the victims believe they were haunted by each other? Lady Margot shuddered. And the handwriting? Who forged it? Poirot's smile was almost gentle. That, dear lady, is the final brilliance. Each note was traced by the same hand, a hand that was present throughout, a hand that no one suspected because it belonged to the person who claimed to be the most terrified of all. All eyes turned to Miss Lydia Arkwright. Miss Arkwright's trembling hand clutched at her throat, her eyes wide with genuine terror. Though not, I suspected, from ghosts. It was the terror of exposure. "Me," she whispered. "That's absurd. I'm the victim. I came to you for help." "Ah, but you see," Poirot said, "that is precisely what makes you so perfect a villain." The room held its breath. "You have played the part to perfection," Poirot continued. "The helpless survivor, the innocent woman haunted by her past. But your fear, mademoiselle, it is too perfect. It is the fear of a woman who knows exactly what will happen next, because she herself has arranged it." "No!" she cried. "You can't believe that." "I believe only the facts," Poirot said, almost sadly. "And the facts, they speak very clearly. The handwriting, the tracing paper found among your belongings, the ink that matches exactly the ink of your own diary, all point to you." "But why would I do such a thing?" Her voice cracked. "What possible motive could I have?" Poirot's voice softened. "Because, Miss Arkwright, you were never merely a witness to that night in Egypt. You had a brother, a young Egyptian boy who tried to warn you all not to enter the tomb. And when your drunken companions pushed past him, they caused a cave-in. That boy, your brother, was buried alive." The shock rippled through the room like a physical blow. "You sought justice," Poirot continued. "But there was none. No court would convict the great Lady Margot and her distinguished troupe for the accidental death of a nameless boy. So you plotted, you waited, and you used the curse as a mask for your revenge." Miss Arkwright's face had gone ashen. "That's a lie." "It is the truth," Poirot said quietly. "You married into their circle, changed your name, and positioned yourself as the innocent outsider. But all the while, you were the spider at the center of the web." Miss Arkwright's hands clenched into fists. "They deserved it," she spat. "All of them." Poirot's expression was grave. "Perhaps. But you see, mademoiselle, murder, it is still murder, even when disguised as a curse." Miss Arkwright's trembling fingers clutched at the edge of the table, her carefully cultivated facade now slipping like stage makeup melting under hot lights. Poirot regarded her with a curious mixture of sternness and compassion, like a schoolmaster who had uncovered a child's dangerous mischief. "It is always the motive, mon ami," Poirot said softly, addressing me even as his gaze remained locked on Miss Arkwright. "The crime itself, it is only the symptom. But the motive, the human heart, that is where the story begins." He turned slightly, addressing the room. "It began, mesdames et messieurs, in a small Egyptian village, a place you barely remember, but which Miss Arkwright could never forget." "She wasn't even there," Breen protested. "She joined the company later." Poirot shook his head. "Non, Miss Lydia Arkwright was there, but you knew her then by another name, her real name." He retrieved a faded photograph from his pocket, one that Miss Arkwright had clearly not expected to see again. It showed a much younger woman standing beside a dark-eyed boy of 12. "This is you, is it not?" Poirot asked gently. "And this boy, your brother, Yusuf." Her gasp was almost inaudible. How did you—" "Poirot observes," he said simply. "And 20 years ago, that boy, your brother, tried to stop a group of careless, drunken actors from entering the forbidden tomb. There was an uncomfortable shifting in seats. You ignored his pleas," Poirot continued. "And when he tried to block your path, some of you pushed past him. In the chaos that followed, the sand shifted. The entrance collapsed. By the time the villagers dug through the rubble, the boy was gone, buried." Miss Arkwright's voice was barely above a whisper. "They killed him." "No," said Poirot. "Their carelessness killed him. But when there was no punishment, no justice, you took on the role yourself." She laughed bitterly. "What justice could there be for a poor Egyptian boy against wealthy English actors? They paid off the authorities, left Egypt as if nothing had happened, and told their silly stories about curses over brandy and cigars." "And so," Poirot said softly, "you became the curse." She clutched the edges of the table so tightly, her knuckles turned white. "I waited years for my chance. When Simon Greaves married me, I had my way in. And you saw, Poirot said, that they had all built the myth of the curse themselves. Lady Margot's seances, the whispered stories. All you had to do was bring the curse to life. She gave a single, tremulous nod. They all deserved to die. Poirot sighed. Perhaps, mademoiselle, but the law, it sees only the act, not the reason. And murder is still murder. Poirot steepled his fingers and took a measured breath. The genius, mon ami, was in the staging. Staging, I echoed. Mais oui. Each death was a performance, a carefully designed act in a play, with props, lighting, and of course, the ever-present scarab. He held up the small bronze beetle retrieved from the pond, turning it so the candlelight glinted off its worn surface. You see, Hastings, Miss Arkwright was not merely a killer, she was a director. The suspect stared at her, horrified. Consider, Poirot continued. Each death recreated a part of the original curse they all whispered about. One drowned, another poisoned in their sleep, one crushed under fallen scaffolding, all methods directly linked to the tomb's so-called prophecy. But they believed the curse, I said. Why would she go to such lengths? Because, said Poirot, a curse is much more terrifying when it behaves precisely as expected. If the deaths had been ordinary, random accidents or street crimes, the survivors would have turned to the police. But when each death followed the legend, they clung to superstition, afraid to speak too loudly, lest the ghostly vengeance come for them next. Lady Margot covered her mouth with a trembling hand. It was you who left the scarab outside my door. Oui, said Poirot. And the veiled figure at the window, also Miss Arkwright. The hotel painter's scaffold provided the perfect stage. No need for ghosts to float through walls when a clever woman could stand outside with a lantern held beneath her chin. It was all a show, Hastings murmured. A show, Poirot agreed, with a very willing audience, people who wanted to believe, and Miss Arkwright knew exactly how to feed that belief. She used our own fears against us, Mrs. Frobisher whispered. Exactly. Poirot's expression was both admiring and reproachful. And the final twist, when Miss Arkwright summoned Poirot himself, it was the crowning touch. She wanted you to solve it? I asked, incredulous. She wanted me to confirm the curse, Poirot corrected. For if even Hercule Poirot declared the death supernatural, who would dare to question it? Miss Arkwright lifted her chin, a defiant glint in her eye. And you almost did. Almost, Poirot agreed. But you see, mademoiselle, Poirot, he does not believe in ghosts. Only in the ghosts that guilt creates. She gave a thin smile. Then you should believe in me. Poirot shook his head. I believe only in what I see. And what I see is a woman who turned grief into a deadly work of art. The candles flickered as if in agreement, and the curtain fell on Miss Arkwright's carefully scripted revenge. Miss Arkwright's composure shattered the moment Poirot's final words settled into silence. The polite, anxious woman who had trembled at every creak of the floorboards was gone. In her place stood a woman fierce with fury, her hands trembling not with fear, but with long-suppressed rage. "Yes!" she cried, her voice rising, tears streaming unchecked down her cheeks. "Yes, I did it! I wrote the letters, I placed the scarabs, I staged every ghostly trick. But why shouldn't I? They killed my brother and walked away, laughing." She spun toward the others, her tear-streaked face twisted with contempt. "Do you remember him? Yusuf, the boy you shoved aside like a stray dog. He was 12 years old, and he died alone in the dark because you wanted your silly adventure." Colonel Breen's bluster failed him, his face pale as chalk. Mrs. Frobisher stared at the table, unable to meet Miss Arkwright's eyes. Lady Margot made a weak noise of protest, but had nothing to say. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch before he spoke, his voice gentle but implacable. "Mademoiselle, I understand your grief, but you must also understand this. Revenge is not justice." She glared at him through her tears. What do you know of justice? Men like you solve your puzzles, write your reports and move on. But there's no justice for boys like Yusuf. Poirot bowed his head briefly. Perhaps not from the law, but murder, even in the name of love, remains murder. Her fury faltered into exhausted despair. I had no choice. Poirot straightened. No, mademoiselle. There is always a choice. You could have exposed them. You could have told the truth, let the world see their guilt. Instead, you chose to become what you hated most. A killer, hiding behind shadows and lies. Hastings shifted awkwardly beside me. The whole scene felt too raw, too tragic, even for all its drama. Miss Arkwright's hands fell limply to her sides. I only wanted them to know what it felt like, to be afraid, to know that the past never lets go. And so it does not, Poirot said softly. But the price, it is always too high. With Miss Arkwright slumped into silence, Poirot dusted his hands as though clearing away invisible crumbs. He turned to Hastings with the air of a tutor, gently preparing to reveal how the magic trick was done. You see, mon ami, the clues, they were there from the very beginning. Hastings frowned. I must have missed them entirely. Exactement. Poirot smiled. Let us begin with the letter she sent us, the urgent plea for help. I retrieved the note from Poirot's pocketbook, reading it over once again. What about it? The phrasing, Poirot said, tapping the paper. Most people in fear. They ramble. They over-explain, oui? But this letter was too perfect. Each word chosen with care, each sentence precisely crafted. That just makes her well-spoken. Non, mon ami. It makes her a woman writing a script, not a cry for help. Poirot's finger traced the final line. She asked not only for protection, but for an investigation. A real victim, they want safety. Only a guilty mind craves the theatre of discovery. I shook my head. That's a thin reason to suspect her. Bien sûr, it was only the first seed, Poirot admitted. But then came the smudged ink on her diary page. Smudged ink? Oui. You see, she wept over her diary, or pretended to. But the ink smudge was not consistent with natural tears. It was placed, deliberately, to give the impression of emotional distress. I could only gape. And then, mon cher Hastings, there was the most telling clue of all, her fear itself. Her fear? Poirot spread his hands. She was too afraid. A woman haunted by supernatural forces reacts with confusion, hysteria, disbelief. But Miss Arkwright was too prepared. She accepted the curse too easily. Why? Because she knew exactly what would happen next. She planned it herself. I stared at her across the table, suddenly seeing her in a new light. Not as a frightened woman, but as an actress, directing her own tragedy. Each small clue, Poirot said, on its own, it meant little. But together, they painted a portrait. Not of a helpless victim, but of a woman staging a masterpiece of vengeance. You saw that from a smudged page? I asked, incredulous. Poirot smiled. Mon ami, you forget. Poirot sees everything. With the confession complete and the curtain nearly drawn, Poirot took one final turn about the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze drifting upward, as though addressing some invisible audience. You see, mes amis, he said, it was never truly the clues that solved this case. Not the scarab, nor the veil, nor even the letters themselves. None. It was the psychology behind the crime. He gestured toward Miss Arkwright, who now sat slumped, a woman wrung dry of both fury and fear. From the very first moment we met her, she was too afraid. Too afraid? I repeated, puzzled. Surely fear was natural under the circumstances. Ah, mon ami, Poirot smiled. There is fear, and there is performance. Miss Arkwright's fear was not the shock of a woman surprised by danger, but the carefully curated fear of a woman who needed us to believe in the curse. She needed us not only to believe, but to follow the exact path she had scripted, right to this very moment. I frowned. But why would that make her suspicious? Because real fear is chaotic, Poirot said simply. It contradicts itself. One moment a person insists on supernatural explanations, the next they cling to rational ones. But Miss Arkwright was too consistent. Every gesture, every word was designed to control the story. He tapped his temple. And that, mon ami, is the flaw. The truly innocent do not try so hard to direct the drama. Miss Arkwright gave a weary, bitter smile. Even now, you sound like a man who's more disappointed than triumphant. Poirot's smile was faint. Perhaps I am. For you, mademoiselle, were a fine actress, but in the end, you left the most important clue of all, the desperate mind of a guilty conscience. It was not until the following morning, after the storm had passed, both the one in the sky and the one Poirot had unleashed, that we prepared to leave the majestic hotel. The sun broke weakly through the clouds as Poirot fastidiously adjusted his travelling cravat, folding it with the care of a man packing not for a journey, but for a performance encore. Another case concluded, mon ami, he said cheerfully, and once again, Poirot's little grey cells proved triumphant. Though I must say, I replied, this one leaves a rather bitter taste. Poirot nodded. Indeed. Justice, it is never as satisfying as the stories suggest. A gentle knock at the door interrupted us. The bellboy stood there, slightly breathless, holding out a small envelope. For Monsieur Poirot, the boy said. It was left at the front desk. Poirot accepted the envelope, turning it over thoughtfully. The handwriting was clumsy and uneven, the sort one might expect from a child. He opened it carefully and read aloud. Merci, Monsieur Poirot. You see what others do not. It was signed, Yusuf. I nearly dropped my hat. But Yusuf is dead, Miss Arkwright said. Poirot smiled softly. Miss Arkwright believed what her grief wanted to believe. But the truth, mon ami, is often less tragic and more miraculous than we expect. He placed the note in his pocket. Come, Hastings, the living call for justice. But the dead, sometimes they simply wish to be remembered. And with that, Poirot descended the stairs, his work complete, his moustache immaculate, and the curse of the 7 witnesses finally laid to rest. As Poirot himself would say, the truth, it hides only from those who do not wish to see it. Every clue, every contradiction, and every trembling hand told a story, not of ghosts and ancient curses, but of human guilt and grief, carefully disguised behind superstition and shadows. In the end, it was not the scarab, nor the veil, nor even the curse itself that solved the mystery. It was the psychology, the delicate cracks in Miss Arkwright's performance, the fear that was just a little too rehearsed. For Poirot, the greatest tool is not the magnifying glass or the fingerprint powder. It is understanding the human heart, which, as always, betrays itself. As we left the Majestic that day, I couldn't help but shake my head. Only you, Poirot, could solve a case by proving a ghost didn't exist, and somehow still make it feel like the ghost had the last word. Poirot merely smiled, adjusting his hat. Mon ami, the ghost never existed, but the guilt that created it. Ah, that was very real indeed. And now, dear viewers, it's your turn to play detective. What do you think was the single most revealing clue that gave Miss Arkwright away? Was it her fear, her letter, or perhaps something even smaller that only Poirot could notice? Share your theories in the comments below, and let's see if your little grey cells match Poirot's. If you enjoyed unraveling this classic Poirot mystery with us, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more thrilling Hercule Poirot cases to life, and there are plenty more twists and turns waiting for you in the next investigation. Until then, remember, every crime hides a story, and every story leaves a clue.